Hollywood has always thrived on glitz, glamour, and the illusion of immortality. But when the HIV/AIDS crisis hit, it tore straight through that fantasy, leaving audiences stunned and stars silenced far too soon. These weren't just names in the credits. They were icons whose lives were cut short while the world whispered. What happens when the brightest lights fade unexpectedly? Stay tuned, because some of these losses will absolutely leave you gasping. Rock Hudson. He was the dreamboat of the 1950s. Rock Hudson didn't just act, he redefined the matinee idol. Tall, handsome, and seemingly untouchable, Hudson was the ultimate Hollywood leading man. Audiences swooned through films like Magnificent Obsession and Giant, never imagining that decades later, he'd become the face of a silent epidemic. In 1985, when Hudson revealed he was battling AIDS, it was a bombshell that shook the world. Back then, few stars dared to acknowledge the disease, let alone attach their name to it. Hudson's public fight brought visibility to a crisis that had been shrouded in stigma and denial. His passing that same year at just 59 wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point. Suddenly, the glamorous world of Hollywood collided with harsh reality, forcing conversations about compassion, research, and awareness. Rock Hudson's legacy isn't only his films, it's his role as the reluctant but powerful figure who made the world face HIV/AIDS head-on. His loss showed that no amount of fame could protect someone from the truth of the epidemic. Freddie Mercury, a voice like lightning. That's what Freddie Mercury brought to every stage he touched. As the frontman of Queen, Mercury didn't just sing, he commanded, seduced, and electrified arenas across the globe. From Bohemian Rhapsody to We Are the Champions, his songs became anthems of rebellion and triumph. But behind the flamboyant costumes and unmatched charisma, Mercury faced a battle he kept intensely private. In 1991, just one day after publicly confirming he had AIDS, Freddie Mercury passed away at the age of 45. The shock was seismic. How could someone so alive, so defiant, be gone in an instant? His death ripped away the curtain and forced millions to realize that AIDS was not some distant issue, but a devastating reality touching even the brightest stars. Fans mourned worldwide, while tributes poured in from musicians, actors, and admirers who saw Mercury as more than a rock star. He was a force of nature. His departure left a silence so deafening it could only be filled by his own music. Freddie Mercury's story reminds us that legends may fall, but their voices never truly fade. Anthony Perkins. Norman Bates wasn't his only haunting role. Anthony Perkins etched his name in film history with Psycho, giving us one of the most chilling villains ever seen on screen. But Perkins' own story was just as tragic. By the early 1990s, Perkins was battling AIDS in near silence. Unlike some stars who eventually went public, he preferred to keep his fight private, fearing the stigma and how it might overshadow his career. In 1992, at just 60 years old, Perkins died of pneumonia linked to AIDS. For audiences, the revelation was heartbreaking. How could a man who gave so much to cinema, whose performances became cultural touchstones, be gone in such a hushed way? In his final words, Perkins reportedly said that he didn't regret his choices in life, but he wished society could have been more compassionate toward those suffering. His death wasn't just the loss of a great actor, it was a sobering reminder of how silence and stigma can weigh heavier than the illness itself. Anthony Perkins left us with iconic characters, but also with the poignant lesson that even the strongest screen presence can be vulnerable behind the scenes. Brad Davis, Hollywood's rebel with raw intensity. Brad Davis lit up screens in the late 1970s, especially with his unforgettable role in Midnight Express. His performance was raw, real, and unlike anything audiences had seen. But while Davis soared on screen, behind the curtain, he was facing a much darker reality. Diagnosed with AIDS in the late 1980s, Davis became one of the earliest Hollywood actors to speak candidly about the disease and its toll. Instead of retreating, he chose to fight stigma with honesty, even as roles began drying up. By 1991, his health had worsened, and Davis passed away at just 41 years old. Fans were devastated, colleagues shaken. His death wasn't just about losing a talented actor. It was about losing a man who had been unafraid to confront Hollywood's silence around AIDS. Brad Davis stood for authenticity in an industry built on illusion, and his story endures as one of courage. He may not have had decades of films under his belt, but the ones he did left marks deep enough to last generations. Liberace, the man who dripped in rhinestones. Liberace wasn't just a pianist, he was a spectacle. Known for his outrageous costumes, sparkling candelabras, and over-the-top performances, Liberace lived larger than life. Yet behind the sequins was a secret he guarded fiercely. When Liberace died in 1987 at the age of 67, official reports at first dodged the truth. It was only later revealed he had died from complications of AIDS. The cover-up reflected the stigma of the times, when admitting the disease could tarnish even the brightest career. For fans who adored his extravagance, the news was a gut punch. Liberace's passing symbolized the way AIDS forced Hollywood to confront uncomfortable truths, even when it tried to hide them. His flamboyant legacy still influences music and performance today, from Las Vegas residencies to pop culture parodies. Liberace's life was glimmer and glitter, but his death showed the cracks in an industry still learning how to face the epidemic honestly. His story is a reminder that no amount of glamour can protect against reality. Halston. He dressed the world in elegance. Halston wasn't just a fashion designer. He was a visionary who defined the look of an era. From Studio 54 to the wardrobes of icons like Liza Minnelli, Jackie Kennedy, and Elizabeth Taylor, Halston's sleek, minimalistic designs screamed luxury. Yet for all his glamour and success, his story ended in tragedy. In 1990, at the age of 57, Halston died from complications related to AIDS. The fashion world was stunned. How could the man who seemed to own New York's nightlife, the man whose name was synonymous with style, be gone? His death was not only a personal tragedy, but also a blow to an industry that thrived on image and beauty. Halston's passing forced fashion to confront the reality of HIV/AIDS head-on, as designers, models, and artists realized how deeply the epidemic had infiltrated their world. His influence still runs through runways today, but his absence reminds us of how much brilliance was lost in those years. Halston wasn't just about clothes. He was about a vision of life that was cut tragically short. Sylvester James Jr. The disco star who made the dance floor a sanctuary. Sylvester's booming falsetto and electrifying performances defined the disco era. Songs like You Make Me Feel, Mighty Real, weren't just hits. They were anthems of freedom and joy. Sylvester's flamboyant style and unapologetic presence made him a beacon for fans who saw him as proof that individuality could shine. But in 1988, tragedy struck when Sylvester died from complications of AIDS at just 41 years old. His passing silenced one of the most unique voices of his generation. Yet even in death, Sylvester refused to be forgotten. He left his royalties to San Francisco organizations fighting HIV/AIDS, ensuring that his music would continue funding the battle against the very disease that took him. Sylvester's story is one of defiance and legacy. His music lives on not just as disco classics, but as bold declarations of being unapologetically yourself in a world that often demanded conformity. Losing Sylvester meant losing more than a singer. It meant losing a warrior whose songs still echo as a call to live fully, loudly, and joyfully. Klaus Nomi, an alien among us. That's how people described Klaus Nomi, the German countertenor who fused opera with futuristic new wave theatrics. With his otherworldly voice and bizarre space-age costumes, Nomi wasn't just an entertainer, he was performance art incarnate. In the late 1970s and early 80s, he stunned audiences in New York clubs, even performing with David Bowie on Saturday Night Live. But his meteoric rise was cut short. In 1983, Klaus Nomi became one of the first celebrity casualties of AIDS, passing away at only 39. His death came before the world fully understood the crisis, making him both a pioneer and a tragic warning. Fans mourned a talent so rare it felt extraterrestrial, someone who redefined what performance could be. Today, Nomi is remembered as a cult icon, influencing musicians, fashion designers, and artists who still see him as a template for fearless creativity. His loss left a gap in a world that never quite knew what to do with him in the first place. Klaus Nomi was ahead of his time, and AIDS stole him before the world could catch up. Patrick Cowley. The sound of the future, stolen too soon. Patrick Cowley revolutionized electronic music with his synthesizer-driven beats that powered the disco underground. If you've ever danced to a thumping bass line in a nightclub, you've felt Cowley's influence. Working alongside Sylvester, he created some of the most iconic tracks of the era. But in 1982, at just 32 years old, Patrick Cowley died of complications from AIDS. His passing came so early in the epidemic that many barely understood what had happened. The tragedy wasn't only personal, it robbed the music world of a visionary. Cowley was experimenting with sounds that later defined house and techno, genres that exploded worldwide after his death. Imagine what he could have created if given more time. Today, DJs and producers still sample his work, keeping his futuristic vision alive on dance floors decades later. Patrick Cowley's death wasn't just a loss. It was a theft of innovation, a silence where there should have been thunder. He's a reminder that AIDS didn't just take lives, it robbed the future of untold possibilities. Eazy-E, Eric Wright. From Compton to the charts. Eazy-E wasn't just a rapper, he was the godfather of gangsta rap. As a founding member of NWA, his raw lyrics and unapologetic style reshaped music, sparking controversy and igniting debates nationwide. But in 1995, at just 30 years old, Eazy-E stunned fans when he announced he was dying of AIDS. The revelation was as shocking as his lyrics, and only weeks later, he was gone. His death forced hip-hop, a world not known for discussing vulnerability, to confront HIV/AIDS head-on. Suddenly, a genre built on bravado had to grapple with loss. Fans were devastated, and fellow artists used the moment to push for awareness in communities that often ignored the issue. Eazy-E's legacy is complicated but undeniable. His music cracked open new possibilities for hip-hop, and his death left a void that reshaped the genre's conversation. He may have lived fast and left early, but his impact echoes in every beat that dares to tell an unfiltered story. Eazy-E was proof that even kings of the street weren't immune to the epidemic. Andy Fraser. A bassline genius gone too soon. Andy Fraser was just 15 when he co-founded the British rock band Free, best known for the timeless anthem, All Right Now. His bass lines didn't just support the music, they drove it, giving the band their unmistakable groove. After Free disbanded, Fraser kept writing and performing, quietly influencing rock far beyond his teenage fame. But life dealt him a heavy hand. Diagnosed with HIV in the early 1990s, Fraser struggled privately with his health for decades. By 2015, at only 62, he passed away, with AIDS-related complications contributing to his decline. His death was a gut punch to classic rock fans who remembered that unforgettable bass line and the kid who played it like thunder in his hands. Fraser wasn't just a musician, he was a survivor who lived long enough to see his influence ripple across generations of rock. The tragedy is that his story, like his riffs, always felt unfinished, cut short before he could have the renaissance many believed was coming. Rock has never sounded quite the same without him. Bobby DeBarge. The golden voice of a family dynasty, Bobby DeBarge had the kind of falsetto that could stop you in your tracks. As the lead singer of the group Switch and later part of the legendary DeBarge family, Bobby's voice carried pain, passion, and a velvet smoothness that made hits like There'll Never Be Unforgettable. But behind the music, Bobby was carrying a devastating secret. Diagnosed with HIV, he chose to keep his condition mostly private, battling through personal struggles and declining health while still trying to perform. In 1995, at only 39, Bobby DeBarge died from AIDS-related complications, leaving fans heartbroken and his family reeling. His passing silenced one of R&B's most promising talents. Bobby's legacy lives on in the influence he had on later soul and R&B artists, who cite his vocals as unmatched. But his story is also a reminder of the devastating reach of AIDS, robbing the world of voices that were still climbing toward their peak. For every high note Bobby hit, there's a note we never got to hear. Robin Crosby, a guitar hero of the hair metal age. Robin Crosby was the towering blonde guitarist for the band Rat, a group that defined 1980s rock excess. With hits like Round and Round, Crosby shredded his way into MTV immortality, but fame came at a cost. Behind the wild parties and arenas full of fans, Crosby was living with HIV. By the mid-1990s, his health began to decline rapidly. He battled addiction alongside the illness, and in 2002, at just 42 years old, Robin Crosby passed away. Fans were devastated, left with the realization that one of rock's giants had fallen too soon. His bandmates remembered him as a larger-than-life presence, both on stage and off, a man who loved the rush of music more than anything. Crosby's death highlighted how the AIDS epidemic didn't just touch Hollywood or pop, it swept into the rock world, taking away talents before their stories were fully told. His riffs remain frozen in time, a snapshot of a decade defined by excess and ended in tragedy. Peter Allen. From small-town Australia to Broadway legend. Peter Allen was more than just a singer-songwriter, he was a showman. Known for his flamboyant style and heartfelt ballads like I Honestly Love You, co-written for Olivia Newton-John, Allen became a Broadway sensation, winning audiences with his charm and magnetic stage presence. Yet even as he lit up concert halls, he battled AIDS privately. In 1992, at only 48 years old, Allen died from the disease, shocking fans who had followed his vibrant career. What made his passing especially painful was how much joy he brought to audiences. His shows were celebrations, filled with energy and life, yet behind the curtain, he was fading. After his death, tributes poured in, acknowledging not only his talent, but also the courage it took to keep performing while battling a devastating illness. Peter Allen's story is one of light dimmed too soon, a reminder that even the most radiant performers sometimes carry silent struggles. His music and spirit, however, continue to inspire. Yo Briath. The star who was too strange for his time. In the early 1970s, Yo Briath was hailed as America's answer to David Bowie. With glam rock theatrics, outlandish costumes, and a voice that could climb skyscrapers, he seemed destined for stardom. But the industry wasn't ready, his albums underperformed, his career stalled, and he faded into obscurity. Yet in underground circles, Yo Briath remained a cult icon, inspiring artists who saw him as fearless. Sadly, in 1983, Yo Briath became one of the first well-known musicians to die of AIDS. He was just 36. His passing underscored how many trailblazers were lost before the world had a chance to fully appreciate them. Today, he's remembered not as a failure, but as a pioneer ahead of his time. His music, rediscovered decades later, has been celebrated for its boldness and creativity. Yo Briath's story is one of unrealized potential, stolen before its time. AIDS didn't just silence him, it silenced a new sound the world desperately needed. Sharon Redd. A disco diva with unstoppable energy. Sharon Redd lit up the dance floors of the late 70s and early 80s with hits like Can You Handle It and Never Give You Up. With her powerful voice and radiant presence, she became a favorite in the disco and R&B scenes. But as her star rose, she quietly faced a devastating challenge. Redd contracted HIV, and by 1992, complications took her life at only 46. For fans, her passing was crushing, not only because of her talent, but because she had been on the cusp of even bigger things. Sharon Redd's music had the potential to evolve beyond disco, yet she never got the chance. Her loss symbolized the epidemic's brutal timing, cutting careers off at the moment of breakthrough. Today, her songs still light up dance floors, but there's always the echo of what might have been. Sharon Redd was more than a performer. She was joy personified, and her passing remains one of music's quiet tragedies. Ray Sharkey, Hollywood's charmer with a dark side. Ray Sharkey rose to fame with his Golden Globe-winning role in The Idolmaker and seemed destined for a career filled with leading roles. With rugged good looks and undeniable charisma, he was one of those actors who lit up every scene. But beneath the charm, Sharkey lived a turbulent life. He struggled with addiction, and when he was diagnosed with HIV, he kept it largely hidden, fearing the impact on his career. In 1993, at just 40 years old, Sharkey died of AIDS-related complications. His death shocked many who remembered him as a rising star who had everything going for him. Hollywood quickly learned that the epidemic wasn't limited to musicians or marginalized groups. It was claiming actors too, sometimes at the height of their promise. Ray Sharkey's story is a reminder that stardom doesn't shield you from reality, and that behind the glamour, the struggles can be immense. He left fans with unforgettable performances, but also with a haunting sense of what could have been. Robert Reed, from TV dad to tragic loss. Robert Reed was beloved as Mike Brady, the wise and steady father in the Brady Bunch. For millions of viewers, he embodied warmth, humor, and guidance. But Reed's real life was far more complex. Behind the iconic role, he was privately battling HIV. In 1992, Reed passed away at the age of 59, with AIDS-related complications revealed afterward. The news stunned fans who had grown up watching him on television as the ultimate symbol of family stability. Reed's passing was especially shocking because his character had been such a cultural cornerstone, making the gap between his TV image and real-life struggles all the more striking. For many, his death humanized the epidemic in a new way, showing that even America's favorite TV dad was not immune. Robert Reed's legacy is bittersweet. He left behind a show that still brings comfort to millions, while his own ending forced audiences to confront uncomfortable truths. Michael Jeter, the character actor who stole scenes. Michael Jeter wasn't a household name, but you knew his face. From The Green Mile to Evening Shade, his performances were layered with warmth, wit, and a touch of quirkiness. He was the kind of actor who could make even the smallest role unforgettable. Jeter lived with HIV for years, managing the illness with resilience. In 2003, he passed away at 50, leaving Hollywood reeling at the loss of such a gifted performer. Fans remembered him not just for his roles, but for the kindness and humor he brought to sets. His passing was another reminder that AIDS wasn't just claiming megastars, it was cutting short the lives of beloved character actors who added depth and richness to Hollywood. Michael Jeter's death left audiences mourning not only the man, but the countless roles he never got to play. He was proof that sometimes the most unforgettable stars are the ones who quietly make every film better. Dak Rambo, the soap heartthrob with a secret battle. Dak Rambo lit up daytime television in shows like Dallas and All My Children. With piercing eyes and matinee idol charm, he was the kind of actor who seemed unstoppable. But behind the glossy magazine covers, Rambo was hiding a devastating truth. Diagnosed with HIV in the early 1990s, he eventually revealed his condition publicly, a rare act of honesty in an industry still shrouded in silence. By 1994, he had succumbed to AIDS-related complications at just 52 years old. Fans who adored his charisma were heartbroken, while colleagues praised his courage in speaking out when few dared to. His death not only robbed Hollywood of a talented actor, but also highlighted the bravery it took to confront the epidemic head-on. Dak Rambo's legacy isn't just his performances, but also his willingness to step out of the shadows at a time when silence was the norm. His story remains one of both tragedy and strength. Ian Charleson, the Olympian who ran out of time. Ian Charleson stole the world's heart with his role in Chariots of Fire, playing the devout runner who refused to race on principle. His performance earned international acclaim, and his stage work in London made him one of Britain's most respected actors. But in 1990, at only 40 years old, Charleson died of AIDS-related complications. His death shook the theater community, not just because of his talent, but because he revealed his diagnosis publicly before passing, an act that brought awareness to a crisis many still wanted to ignore. Charleston's bravery went beyond his roles. It was in how he faced his final chapter. His colleagues praised his dignity, and his memory lives on through an award in his name, given to actors who show outstanding promise in classical theater. Losing Charleston wasn't just about losing a performer. It was about losing a man who lived his art with conviction, both on stage and in life. Merritt Butrick. Star Trek's bright young face extinguished. Merritt Butrick was best known for playing Captain Kirk's son, David Marcus, in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. His charisma and intensity made him a fan favorite, and he later appeared in popular shows like Square Pegs. But Butrick's promising career was cut short when he died of AIDS-related complications in 1989 at only 29 years old. His passing devastated Star Trek fans, who saw him as the next generation of talent within the beloved franchise. What makes his story especially heartbreaking is how much more he could have given. His colleagues remembered him as fearless and full of energy, a young actor with limitless potential. Merritt Butrick's death remains one of the great losses of Hollywood's younger generation to the epidemic, a reminder of how AIDS robbed us not only of legends, but of rising stars before their time. Charlie Barnett, the comedian who could have ruled the stage. Charlie Barnett was a raw, unfiltered talent. Known for his street performances in New York's Washington Square Park, he had a charisma that drew crowds and made people laugh until they cried. In the early 1980s, he seemed poised for stardom, even auditioning for Saturday Night Live. Although he didn't land the gig, his comedy, specials and acting roles in films like DC Cab gave him a loyal fan base. But beneath the laughter, Barnett faced struggles with addiction and illness. In 1996, at just 41, he died of complications from AIDS. For those who saw him perform live, it was clear he was a once-in-a-generation comic. His death left fans wondering what heights he could have reached had he lived longer. Barnett's legacy is bittersweet. He made audiences roar with joy, but his story ended far too soon. In many ways, he was comedy's great what if. Amanda Blake. Miss Kitty's Secret Battle. Amanda Blake became a household name playing Miss Kitty on the long-running TV Western Gunsmoke. For nearly 20 years, audiences tuned in to watch her portray the fiery saloon owner with warmth and grit. Off-screen, however, Blake faced personal struggles, including a devastating diagnosis. In 1989, she passed away at 60, with AIDS-related complications later confirmed as a contributing cause. Fans were stunned. How could America's favorite TV cowgirl be gone so suddenly? Her death highlighted how far-reaching the epidemic was, affecting stars across genres and generations. For viewers, it was a jarring reminder that the disease was not confined to any one world. It touched everyone, even the icons of wholesome television. Amanda Blake's legacy remains tied to Gunsmoke, but her death also became part of a larger conversation about honesty, stigma, and how celebrities could humanize a crisis the world often tried to ignore. Christopher Burnau. Soap opera royalty silenced. Christopher Burnau was the charismatic star of Guiding Light, where his portrayal of Alan Spaulding made him a household name among soap opera fans. He had the looks, the charm, and the screen presence to carry storylines that kept viewers glued for years. But while audiences saw a powerful businessman on screen, Burnau was privately fighting a deadly illness. In 1989, he died at just 49 from AIDS-related complications. For fans of daytime television, his death was shocking. Soaps had a reputation for melodrama, but here was a tragedy that felt all too real. His colleagues remembered him as a consummate professional who delivered every line with conviction, no matter how wild the plot. Burnau's passing cut short a career that still had so much left to give. He was proof that the epidemic didn't discriminate. It claimed stars from every corner of Hollywood, even the ones who lived in our homes daily through television. Dallas Adams, a familiar face on British screens. Dallas Adams wasn't a global superstar, but to British television audiences, he was a steady presence, appearing in shows like Doctor Who and Brookside. With a flair for both drama and humor, Adams had carved out a career that hinted at even bigger things ahead. Sadly, in 1991, he died of AIDS-related complications at only 44. For his fans, his death was a heartbreaking reminder of how many mid-level actors, the ones who might not have been household names but still made an impact, were lost during this time. His passing didn't make global headlines, but it devastated those who had followed his work faithfully. Dallas Adams' story reflects the quieter side of the epidemic, talents who may not have been international icons, but whose contributions mattered deeply to those who knew them. His loss shows that AIDS wasn't just erasing stars, it was erasing entire careers in progress. John Megna, the boy who grew up in Hollywood's shadow. John Megna will always be remembered as Dill, the imaginative friend of Scout and Jem in the classic To Kill a Mockingbird. His childhood performance captured innocence and charm, making him a standout in one of the most important films ever made. As he grew older, Megna moved into theater directing and teaching, preferring life behind the scenes. But tragedy struck when he contracted HIV, and in 1995, he died of complications from AIDS at just 42. Fans of Mockingbird were crushed to learn that the sweet boy from the film had been lost too soon. Megna's life may not have been filled with blockbuster roles, but his contributions to acting and directing were meaningful. His story underscores how the epidemic didn't just take the headline names, it claimed childhood stars, behind-the-scenes talents, and working actors whose artistry was vital to Hollywood's ecosystem. Steve Moore, the comic who made tragedy funny. Steve Moore was a stand-up comedian whose storytelling and humor often revolved around his own struggles. Diagnosed with HIV, he chose to turn his pain into laughter, using comedy as a way to raise awareness and break down stigma. His HBO special, Drop Dead Gorgeous, a tragicomedy, was groundbreaking in its honesty and courage. Moore's humor was biting, but it was also deeply human, making audiences laugh while facing uncomfortable truths. He continued performing for years, but in 2014, at 59, he passed away from AIDS-related complications. His death left a void in the comedy world, where few dared to be as honest or as fearless. Steve Moore's legacy is about more than jokes. It's about how comedy can be a weapon against fear. By telling his story on stage, he gave others the courage to speak their truth. Timothy Patrick Murphy, the rising star of primetime. Timothy Patrick Murphy gained fame on Dallas, where he played Mickey Trotter, a character caught up in the show's juicy drama. With his boyish good looks and natural charm, Murphy seemed poised for a bright career in television. But in 1988, at only 29 years old, he died of AIDS-related complications. His death shocked fans of the show and highlighted just how young many of the epidemic's victims were. Murphy had barely begun to scratch the surface of his potential, making his loss especially devastating. Colleagues described him as a joy to work with, a young actor with both the talent and the drive to go far. His story is another reminder of how AIDS robbed the entertainment world of not just legends, but promising careers still in their infancy. Timothy Patrick Murphy's short but memorable career left fans wondering how far he could have gone. Jeffrey Milet. From Godspell to silence. Jeffrey Milet was a Broadway performer and actor who gained recognition for his role in the groundbreaking musical Godspell. His warm stage presence and voice made him a standout in a production that broke barriers and captured hearts. Milet also appeared in films, bringing the same sincerity and light he carried on the stage. Tragically, in 1986, he died from AIDS-related complications at just 36. His passing was yet another reminder of how deeply the epidemic struck the theater world, taking away talents just as they were beginning to blossom. For Broadway, which lost so many during those years, Milet's death was both personal and symbolic. He represented a generation of performers who might have carried musicals into new eras, but whose voices were silenced before they could soar. Jeffrey Milet's legacy lives on in The Joy of Godspell, a show that remains a celebration of community and connection, two things AIDS tried to steal, but never fully could. David Oliver, a soap star who left too soon. David Oliver was known for his role on the NBC drama A Year in the Life, where he played a young man navigating family struggles. His performance won him a loyal following and opened doors for future television roles. But behind the bright career prospects, Oliver was privately battling HIV. In 1992, at only 30 years old, he died of AIDS-related complications, stunning fans who believed he was just getting started. Colleagues remembered him as warm, talented, and easy to work with, a young actor with all the tools for a long career. His loss was felt deeply in the TV community, a reminder that the epidemic wasn't sparing anyone, not even those at the very beginning of their stardom. David Oliver's death is one of those stories that leave fans asking, what if? He had the looks, the talent, and the drive. What he didn't have was the time. Pedro Zamora, the reality star who made awareness real. Pedro Zamora rose to fame on MTV's The Real World, San Francisco in 1994. Unlike other cast members, Zamora wasn't just there for drama. He was there to educate. Living openly with HIV, he used the show to spread awareness, share his story, and break down barriers of misunderstanding. Millions of young viewers, many learning about HIV/AIDS for the first time, saw Pedro as both a teacher and a friend. Tragically, before the season even finished airing, Zamora died in November 1994 at just 22 years old. His death was devastating, but his impact was monumental. President Bill Clinton even praised him for putting a human face on the epidemic. For many, Pedro was their first exposure to the reality of living with HIV, and his bravery changed how a generation viewed the disease. His legacy isn't just in reality TV, it's in the countless lives he touched by being vulnerable, honest, and determined to make a difference. Elizabeth Glaser, a mother who turned tragedy into activism. Elizabeth Glaser wasn't a Hollywood star in the traditional sense, but her story shook the entertainment world. The wife of actor Paul Michael Glaser, she contracted HIV through a blood transfusion during childbirth in 1981. Tragically, she unknowingly passed the virus to her daughter Ariel and later to her son Jake. In 1988, Ariel died at just 7 years old, and Elizabeth became an activist, co-founding the Pediatric AIDS Foundation. She fought tirelessly to raise awareness about children affected by the epidemic, lobbying Congress and speaking out when few dared to. In 1994, Elizabeth died at 47, leaving behind a legacy of courage and change. Her activism reshaped the way America thought about HIV/AIDS, especially regarding children and families. Hollywood rallied around her, and her foundation continues saving lives today. Elizabeth Glaser's story is one of the most heartbreaking yet powerful chapters in this history. Proof that even in tragedy, some stars shine brighter than ever. Howard Rollins, the star of stage and screen, cut short. Howard Rollins earned an Oscar nomination for his breakout role in Ragtime, 1981, and went on to win over television audiences as Virgil Tibbs in the Heat of the Night. His talent was undeniable, and his presence brought depth and dignity to every role. But behind the acclaim, Rollins struggled with personal battles and failing health. In 1996, at just 46 years old, he died of complications related to AIDS and cancer. For fans who had followed his career from his dazzling debut, the news was crushing. Rollins had seemed destined for a long life of memorable performances, yet his time was cut short just as he was beginning to establish himself as a lasting Hollywood figure. His passing highlighted how AIDS continued to claim stars across genres, even into the mid-1990s. Today, Howard Rollins is remembered as a gifted actor whose life serves as both a warning and a reminder of resilience. His death left audiences wondering about the countless roles he never had the chance to play. These 34 names are more than a list. They're a chorus of voices silenced too soon. They remind us that HIV/AIDS didn't discriminate. It touched every corner of Hollywood, from the biggest icons to rising talents. Which of these losses shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories. Because remembering isn't just history, it's honoring. And honoring is how legacies never fade.